Good evening, everyone. It's Doug Fabrizio here from RadioWest. Of course, this is our partnership with the Utah Film Center. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us for this question and answer period for the film, extraordinary film, I think. Thanks very much for joining us. So I have to say, this is really exciting for us. We have and are hoping to have, along with the director, and we'll introduce Jared and producer Roni Jo Draper here in just a moment, but we also are going to be joined by, we hope, all three of the main characters in this documentary. Granite Sloan is actually with us, and I'll just take a moment to say, Granite, hi, and welcome to you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Hi.
Glad you could be with us. We're hoping to be joined by Elle and by Noah, and they'll just pop on the screen. So we'll just roll with the punches, though. So I'm looking forward to that. Jared Jakins, welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us again.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And Roni Jo Draper, producer, cultural advisor, of course, professor of education. Welcome to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I guess before we I wanted to, one of the things we talked about on the RadioWest program where we were talking about the film, we talked a little bit about, Jared, what got you started. The initial idea, or one of the ideas, was to film this interesting robotics team that seemed to be going on at Navajo Mountain High School. And then it turned. Will you just say a little bit about the first inclination you had? What was this supposed to be at first? Just tell those who didn't get a chance to hear about it a little bit about what the initial idea was.
Sure. We really thought the film would be like a competition narrative. You know, we'd follow and like an unlikely team to success in a robotics competition, a team from a very remote rural place. And, you know, it's kind of a straightforward film. It's almost its own genre in a way. And with time, we kind of realized that wasn't the film that our participants seemed to be most interested in. And I mean, Granite's here, so I don't want to speak for him, but it seemed to us that they weren't necessarily as passionate about the robotics team as maybe we thought they would be. Yeah, so we made a shift, which came probably at least 6 months into the process of documenting the robotics team. So there's a lot of material that is just gone.
Yeah. When did you know you had a film? Like at first it was like, oh, this could, and I have to say, a robotics team with an unlikely group in this remote high school, that we've kind of seen that before to some degree, maybe, and we haven't seen anything like this. At least I haven't. It's remarkable in that sense. So when did that idea come to you? When did you realize that? When did the idea of the film all of a sudden occur to you? This is what this is going to be about.
I think this is the film I always wanted to make, but it's not the film that's easiest to fund.
Wow.
And so the robotics team was really an opportunity for us to package it in a way that seemed commercially viable. And after we gave that the best shot we could, and we weren't excited about it, that's when I think we felt emboldened to shift.
Yeah. And is it a risk to lean into the idea of a film that's more observational? It's a verite film. In other words, there's not a clear narrative that's easily found. I mean, you have to go in and find it, and it's this collection of scenes. It's these vignettes. We talked about that in the radio program. But that seems scary and risky to say, I'm going to devote some time, because you have to have the right sort of people, the right environment. I mean, that seems risky as a filmmaker to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. And there were many times when, as a team, we were maybe doubting our ability to follow through with to deliver on these wonderful stories in a way that felt authentic and really meaningful. But I think it's a good time to give credit to our great editor, Christian Jensen, who was very patient as I was bringing these scenes back to him. And he had to have a lot of, he had to be able to, I guess, manage a lot of different threads at once. Potential thing, because when you're shooting observationally, you don't want to control the situation too much. So you kind of are letting things go. And you're hoping that something that's interesting in this scene this day will connect with something that you get later. And I think with time, those connections started to appear, and that's when we kind of felt like we had something.
Granite, I wanted to ask you, what did you think about the idea of a film crew following you around and trying to shoot some of the most intimate moments of your life, your conversations with Daisha and other people? Like, what was your first reaction to that idea?
At first I was really scared. Because like I never had anyone follow me, like recording me. It's kind of nerve-wracking for me too.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know how to like act or do stuff like that, because I've never had anyone follow me to camera before. Yeah. So yes, I was a bit nervous, scared, but I got used to it.
Yeah. How long did it take you to trust Jared and the crew? Was that a hard part? And let me put it this way: did you feel suspicious of the white guys in the crew coming down to try to document, this Native American experience? And what do you guys know about our lives? I mean, how much of that did you think, at least in those early days or throughout the process?
It was all right. I trusted them after meeting with them, talking with them. That's after talking to them, I trusted them. Yeah.
There's this. There's something that you, Jared, had talked about, and Ron Jo, I want to hear you on this as well. And it was the idea that you've talked about that, Jared, that you wanted the process, you wanted to make Granite and Elle and Noah participants in, I think as you put it, or someone from the team put it, in crafting their own representations. What did that mean, to make them active participants? I mean, because I'm just thinking filmmakers following them around, you're hands off, you just let play out what play out. But was there any kind of collaboration? I mean, what was the relationship like, if you can describe that?
Shall I begin with that?
Sure. Or Roni Jo, whichever. Yes, go ahead.
It's interesting to say we're making an observational film that's very collaborative, and it almost seems like it's a bit of a contradiction, but I think it's a very fine balance that we were trying to strike. One in which we would collaborate in sort of crafting an environment to explore a certain idea, and then after that was sort of settled, that's when observation began. And I don't know if that really is very clear, but yes, and maybe Granite could even add to that, what his experience was working with me. But what do you think, Roni Jo?
Well, I mean, part of the question is really, how do we create a situation where these young people are really part of the storytelling, where they get to be at the center of the story and be part of crafting the story themselves. And I think that's part of the tension of even somebody coming into that space and saying, well, I'm going to create a story about this space, but I'm not really from this space, and this isn't really a story that that I'm necessarily an expert about, or is something that that I know anything about. And so how do I have sensitivity about that storytelling. So then, you know, being collaborative with the participants in a way that allowed them not to be just you know, subjects of observation, but also to step into being able to be story creators, I think is something that I don't know. I hope that people who watch the movie see that is happening, or see that those opportunities take place, and that those were created, you know, that Jared created those kind of opportunities. But I think that makes the film special as well.
What was it like? I'm not sure if you can or would like to reveal what those collaborations were like, but I'm imagining maybe a conversation you have, you know, early in the day or as part of the process where you're saying, Noah, I'm noticing this tension between you and your father. I'd like to explore that a little bit. Are you okay if we look into that? Or what do you think about having a conversation with Jonah? Is that too much? Can we do that? How do you feel about that? Was it anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what would often happen is I would go to Navajo Mountain for a few weeks at a time. And then I'd come home, and with my editor, we'd kind of go through everything we got. And then we'd sort of make a list of, oh, it would be nice if we could explore this further. Or it'd be nice if, you know, we'd kind of make a hit list of things that we thought would be useful.
Right.
And then when I'd arrive on the next production trip, I would sit down with Noah and say, these are a handful of things that we think would be interesting to talk about. How do you feel about them? If we were to do some of those things, where would you want to talk about it? Who would you want to talk about it with? But I definitely, with Noah and his father, Jonah, that was one where we noticed that could be a big part of his story. And we had talked to him about it a few times. And that was one where we really had to wait for Noah to know how he wanted to proceed with it. And I think it sort of had to coincide with the way that their relationship was playing out in real life as well.
Granite, what is it like to, when you first saw it, when you first started seeing these scenes, and some of them are really, I imagine some of them were kind of difficult to watch. Like I'm just imagining the moment when you're being told there's not enough guys to play basketball. Like even that was kind of it's such a gut-wrenching moment to some degree. Like, because I know your dreams of wanting to play basketball, and that was tough. But I'm also wondering about, you know, some of this kind of really intimate conversation you had with Daisha, you revealing. I mean, what was that like, seeing yourself in such personal moments? What was that like, seeing yourself there?
Dude, I just wanted to like express myself, my feelings, because I knew that would be the chance that everyone knows that what I'm going through. So yeah, so I figured that was like one way to get it out there.
Yeah, you. So it was important for you for people to hear your story. Is it fair to say you didn't want to keep it kind of bottled up? This was an opportunity.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Roni Jo, how important is that? How important is that idea, especially when you're talking about young people? And it could be said in these vulnerable populations, how is it important for them to be a part of that process so they didn't get, you know, I can imagine in some circumstances getting manipulated, their stories being exploited, you know, how important is that relationship, that participation, that collaboration, do you think?
Well, I think that is really crucial because I think especially for Indigenous people, for Native peoples, you know, first of all, our stories often aren't told at all. And when they are told, they often aren't told with our actual voices or from our actual point of view. And there are, there are so few stories that are told, that are being told right now of contemporary Native peoples. What's going on right now for Native peoples who are living right now, and for folks like Granite and Noah and Elle, right now, what is their lives right now? The challenge isn't that Granite doesn't have a beautiful story to tell. The challenge is that people aren't asking, that folks just aren't being maybe curious enough to ask the question and to find out what those stories are, and to know that those that the people who have those stories are they're very willing to tell those stories and hear them if we're just willing to ask and willing to listen.
Yeah. I want to remind those who are watching that you can, in the chat, you can send questions that we'll be able to fold into the conversation. Viridiana is asking a question that, Viridiana, I wanted to get a little clarification from you on this question. She wants to know, it's a question she's put to Jared. What was the feeling or experience that young Native kids have to go through in comparison to kids in the city? I'm imagining the comparison to urban kids and white kids versus kids in those in Navajo Mountain. I'm guessing that's the question, but Viridiana, before I ask it, before we get to it, maybe clarify what you want from that question before we get to it. In the meantime, I wanted to ask a little bit about, Jared, the process of, did you interview them? How much did you prompt them? Or did you have rules for, like, I'm just going to let this play out? I mean, what was it like? Because I'm imagining for young people who feel shy anyway, you want it to be real, you want it to be authentic, you want it to be an actual experience, but I'm just wondering if you had to prompt them, what just sort of what other role you might have played in that way.
Yeah. Well, I did interview all three of them, but it may not look like an interview that we're accustomed to.
Yeah.
But for instance, I remember there was one time we interviewed Granite in a more traditional way, where we sort of sat him down and I asked him questions, but that never made it into the film. Usually I would, and one of the things I guess that we discovered was the best way to I guess gather information or reveal information to the audience was through conversation. And so that's why we centered a lot of the interactions between family members, et cetera. And what I would normally do is I would give them a few ideas of what to talk about, and then I would just start capturing the scene. And sometimes I might remind them of a certain thing, but I think for the most part, it was, like I said before, we kind of set the stage and then we let it play out.
There's a question from Mary about gods in the Diné culture that, Mary, I'm going to hold off on this question too, because we're hoping that this would be an appropriate question for Elle, who we think might be joining us. She might be updating her Zoom, which we all know what that's all about. So we're hoping to hear from her and possibly again Noah, but so let's hold off on that question for now. I wanted to ask about the idea of, I mean, this is a documentary film series, so let me ask a process kind of question, if you allow me, Jared, and that is, how much of this, of what happens in a film, if you can even answer this, how much of it is just damn good luck? Like you had some profound moments that just played out in front of you. How much of that is part of the your ability to be aware enough at the moment when you're shooting this to capture it, to keep your mouth shut and just zoom in, right? Or whatever it might be. How much of it is you creating the context for these things to play out? Like, and maybe it's just a magical alchemy of all of those things that come together. I don't know, but what's your sense of it? At least now that you've now created, this is your first feature documentary. So what is your sense of it early in your career as it is?
Well, I think it is probably the latter. It's an alchemy of sorts, but it's odd because at the beginning of this project, a lot of it felt sort of like just great luck. But I think as trust was developed and I guess I got more experience on how to handle these scenes, that luck seemed to be more common. And so it's hard to explain. I don't really know, but I think as a filmmaker, you kind of get in a rhythm and you start, your intuition becomes louder and you can kind of develop a better sense of where to be and what you need to be doing with the camera. I've described it to some of my producers that at times it almost feels like you're dancing with your participants in a way where you kind of just have to keep up with them. And that ties a little bit into my process that early on in the film, we had a small crew with me at the school. And after one leg of production that way, I decided that that just wasn't going to work. And so I stripped the team down just to myself, really. And I'd usually have someone there nearby as an assistant to run batteries or cards or whatever I needed. But for the most part, it was just me with the camera.
Roni Jo, what do you think about that question? Like, what do you think? You've seen probably your share of documentaries about Native culture that just you hated or didn't think lived up to it, or and now seeing this one, being involved in this one, advising them. What do you think is the kind of gift that makes one of these things work?
Well, I think that if you spend perhaps any amount of time in any sort of local space, whether it's Indigenous or not, an Indigenous space or not, you're going to find something interesting. It's a matter of if you've maybe got the skill to capture that. I think really local stories, really compact stories are really the most fascinating. Because I think that they end up being really the more universal stories because they end up being more even more relatable, because they become like the story that we have here about family, about personal triumphs, about personal hard things. And I think that people are able to relate to those in particular ways, even when they're about people that are very far removed from them, or, in places that are very far away. I think that people end up being able to relate to them because they're able to relate to that kind of human experience. And so, so I think that when people go into Native communities and they don't try to show the wholeness of the community and they don't try to show the fullness of it, I think that's when the story gets really problematic. Because we need to be shown all people in their full humanity, not just a part of their humanity. And so that, that's where I think that's where good storytelling happens. You know, we need to laugh a little, cry a little, cheer a little, you know, be deflated a little. That's what I think that's what good human stories are about.
Yeah. Here's a good story that comes from Tom. Tom, I guess what Tom is asking is, he says, what would you have wanted if you had been part of a film like this when you were young? Which I think is a great question. Like, what would you have wanted, and what would that experience have been like for you, a documentary crew following you around, trying to document your Indigenous experience?
For
Because
me,
one thing you've said to us, and we talked a little bit about this, is you say that these are the stories that are in this film are the stories that you ask your elders to tell you about their past, that we neglect to ask young people these same kinds of stories often. And so what if you were the young person in this, you know, Native community being followed around by these guys?
sure. I guess I would want people to see. I mean, I think that when I was young, I think I still am very much like this. I think I have a lot of silliness in me. I would hope that a lot of my silliness would come through. I consider myself, I think I'm a smart person. I hope that my smartness would come through. I also would hope, you know, I was baffled a lot in school by the way that stories about Indigenous people were told, and I was baffled a lot, and I would like that to be portrayed. Um, you know, I was told stories in school about how Indians um, were in the past. I remember that a lot, and I remember being told about how Indians were and how they used to be, and knowing in my mind that I was going home to my own Indian family, that to my own Yurok dad, and that all the things that my teacher was describing about Native peoples didn't match up to what I knew I was going home to that afternoon. And I knew I also didn't have the language. I didn't have a way of sort of, you know, refuting that. And I think that would be an interesting story to show, you know, how does a young, silly, smart girl stand up to or deal with that kind of confusion at school, you know, when someone like me is trying to be smart, trying to be good, trying to follow the rules of school, and wanting to be able to say, I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
Like, you must not be talking about my grandma or my dad or my aunties. So yeah, I think that would have been a good movie.
Yeah. Viridiana's sort of clarified her question. Let me come back to it. She said she was wanting to get a sense of, one of the things she mentions in her question is, what did you notice about the emotions of the young people that are in this film, that you talked to, that you profiled, maybe compared to those that you see in a more urban environment, in, you know, in white culture, for example? One of the things she writes also is that she says, I just noticed sadness and concern about their futures. So what was the comparison, I suppose, that you made? And Roni Jo, I guess we should say, and we talked about this a little bit on the radio program, in many ways, the experiences of young people coming of age in adolescence and experiencing trauma is the same in a lot of different kinds of communities. This is not just an experience for Indigenous young people. So, but say a little bit about, maybe you can respond to that question if it makes sense to you.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't want people to see sadness and concern for futures. I would want them to see young people who are confronting futures, certainly, and hard futures. and that they would see young people who are confronting a load of possibilities, and at the same time, I would want them to understand if those young people are confronting hard things. I guess I'd want folks to understand that those hard things are being confronted because we are still dealing with settler colonization. We're still dealing with that. You know, and so that still is a reality for Native peoples. But yeah, I think that you would see that you would see that if you were looking in schools in Provo. You would see the same kind of levels of hope, the same kind of levels of fear about the future, same kind of hope about the future. But yeah, but you would see a basketball team, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there are differences. Yeah.
So that, you know, you would see at least that kind of opportunity.
Jared, what do you think? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a hard one for me to answer because, well, one thing that struck me, and I don't know if this necessarily answers the question, and I have very limited experience in other schools, really. I mean, I had my own educational experience, and I grew up in a pretty rural place, but it's nowhere near as rural or as small of a school community as Navajo Mountain. But I noticed, at least with Granite and Elle and Noah, they're so emotionally mature, and that was something that I really respected about them. And I thought, I don't remember that about myself or about my peers in high school. But that was something that, I mean, they were able to talk about things that I don't think I'd thought about yet when I was, you know, in high school. So that would be my 2 cents.
Granite, here's another question for you. Lauren, one of our viewers tonight, wants to know your thoughts about the learning of, you know, Navajo culture and the language. This comes up in the film a lot, actually. That's sort of an underlying theme that, as one of the teachers says, well, in the weight room, technology is taking our young people from us. So, Granite, what do you think about the expectations that you're seeing from the, you know, the elder generations, older people talking to you about language and culture? What are you hearing, and what do you think about that?
Usually a lot of people always tell us that. So like, how do I say it? I don't really learn, like I just pay attention to what they say.
Yeah.
And I just go along with it and catch on with it. Yeah.
And but you want that for yourself. You want that. You want to. Do you feel strongly about preserving the language, preserving the culture? Or do you think about it at this stage of your life?
Yeah.
I wonder, what did you think of the film, Granite? You've seen it now. What?
Yeah.
Tell us what you thought.
I liked it. I liked it a lot. My family enjoyed it. They liked it too. It was pretty good.
What was the conversation like after among your family? Like, what'd you guys talk about? Like, I mean, after you sort of set aside the fact that, man, you looked good, or what were you doing, or whatever, like the goofy stuff. What was I don't know if it led to any serious, you know, dinner table conversations, but what did you guys talk about in the family after that?
Yeah, they started talking to me about like how I should pay attention in class, because they saw how I act in class. Yeah, so they just told me that start paying attention. Yeah, that's about it. Cause
yeah, you said something, Granite, in the film that to me was like one of the kind of most important things, and I wanted to ask you about it. It's this, in this conversation you're having with Daisha, and you talk about that it's your family. It's still, family is such an important idea in the film, I think. But then you said this, you said, all you have to do when something tragic happens is just live with it. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but a lot of us who watched that found that to be deeply honest, but kind of sad that you just have to live with it. That seems, as opposed to letting in. I don't know. I don't know if you want to. Do you want to say anything about that? Because I thought it was a beautiful thing to say, but some of us found it kind of sad as well.
Yeah, you just gotta keep on going with it. Try to forget the moments that happen. Yeah, that's about it. Just try to forget and live on with it. Like, it happened in the past, so you gotta try and forget about it and just move on.
Jared or Roni Jo, do you want to talk about that in the context of trauma being a sort of a subtext in some ways to this? You know, here is Granite tonight, and in the film saying you just need to sort of move on, and maybe that's right, but what do you want to say about that idea and that idea of trauma? Because I saw it as a subtext throughout as well. Jared, you start.
That is a tough topic. It's a tough one to talk about, even though, yeah, you're absolutely right that it's something that, you know, is sort of permeated throughout the film. But I guess as filmmakers, we never wanted to try and make a commentary about it at all, if that makes sense. And we didn't want to be didactic in any way.
Yep.
But we were very aware of that, and I think Roni Jo spoke so eloquently about it on the RadioWest show. So I think I would defer to her to enlighten us more about that. But yeah, I mean, I remember that scene when we shot it, that it felt like a really important piece of this puzzle, even if it's hard for me to articulate what it is.
Yeah, that's a good answer, by the way. I think that's exactly right for a filmmaker. Just like, I can't resolve this. I can't necessarily process it. That's not my job. I lay it out before you. Here it is, guys. And you deal with it, right? And I think that's right. I think that's what good filmmaking does. Roni Jo, you want to say anything more about that?
No, I think that's right. We're not interested in being didactic, which I think is also a very indigenous way of being. You know, that you know, we lay out the story, and you can take from the story what you want. I mean, I think even Granite's point earlier that, you know, you hear the stories, people tell you things, and you take it in, and you take everybody's story in, and you know, you take from that what you can, and that is like the proper way of being a good story listener. And, you know, there is some beauty in saying, of experiencing trauma and being able to stand and being able to take steps forward and move forward with it. And for the indigenous people of this continent, that has been the story over and over and over again. And that has been survival, and that has been a beautiful story. And so there is something really beautiful and magical about that as well. And I think that, I think the challenge of figuring out how to tell a story about trauma and survival in a way that doesn't romanticize trauma, and that doesn't, that doesn't, that doesn't minimize it. That's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
But here we are, and Elle is joining us.
Elle is joining us. So that I am delighted, Elle. We are so glad to have you. She sent a message to everyone saying, "Yo, what did I miss?" And what you missed was like 15 minutes of us waiting for you to get here. So we're glad you did. Welcome. Thanks for being with us. You're muted, by the way.
Oh, sorry about that.
Hi, Elle.
Yo.
Hey, I wanted to ask you, I'm going to ask you a few of the questions I put to Granite here earlier. How long did it take you to trust Jared and his crew? What was that process like? And when you were first approached with this idea, did you worry about being taken advantage of, that your story might be exploited? I mean, talk a little bit about how you reacted to that, how you built a sense of trust with them.
I didn't really wait, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It didn't really like take a long time because I didn't really like interact with Jared. Anyway. Yeah, I didn't really interact with Jared a whole lot in the beginning because he was just like filming everyone else at school. And because of that, I was how do I say it? Sorry. I was kind of standoffish because he's just filming all like that. Didn't want to like be on film, so I would just like avoid the camera at every chance I could. But he would film like me and like a couple of my friends, especially Joel, together and like ask us questions and stuff. And then eventually he asked if he could come over to my grandma's house and we could start filming. And it was fine. It was fine throughout the whole thing. I didn't even think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just like, oh, okay, I'm just answering questions and stuff like that. But yeah, Gerda, I guess be friendly with Jared, I guess you could say, and all that. It didn't really take that long of a time, I guess.
Right. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
He's got that mustache that looks pretty cool. So how could you not say yes? Did you what did you think about revealing, like that moment with your grandmother was such a powerful moment. What was it like to have such a private moment captured, to be able to share it with the rest of us? How are you feeling about that? That was like, I'm grateful that it was that you allowed that experience happened. It made my life better to have had that, to have seen something like that. I thought it was extraordinary. But like, how are you thinking of it? Because you had to watch it on the big screen, right? And so, what did you think about that?
Funny story. We didn't film that scene until like almost like a month or like a couple of weeks ago. Why is that hot? Anyway, so I didn't
very
actually
mysterious,
see.
by the way, Al. There's no light there at all, that's
Oh.
okay. The top
Sorry.
of your head looks cool. That's all right.
Yeah, both of you get back in the house.
This is like the
Anyway.
film all over again.
Yeah. Being annoying. Anyway, yeah, I didn't really get to see. I didn't. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't really. No, don't give her any. I didn't get to see the scene with my grandma. God dang it.
Oh no!
Darn it!
Oh boy. I can kind of contextualize a little bit what she's describing. That scene with her grandmother grew out of discussions as we were preparing to share the film with her and her family. We were being very cautious. Are you back, El?
Yeah. How long was I like cut out? Because I just got back. Yeah. Hold on. Sorry. Hold on. Get the fucking there. You two in it. You two in it. Get in there. God. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Sorry, you're saying. Sorry about that.
No, you were just saying that you had just started, you had just filmed it about a month ago.
Yeah, so I didn't actually get to see this scene, but yeah, like Jared said, we talked a while about filming it and stuff like that. It felt weird because I thought I wasn't.
We'll get her back. That's all right. That is one of the things that comes up in the film. It's like,
I'm so sorry.
There you are. Okay, it's all right.
So
Keep going.
sorry.
We got you.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I'm just outside, so sorry about that.
That's okay. You were saying it was kind of strange to see it, I think is what you were saying.
Yeah, I actually didn't see the film, but while filming it was weird because throughout the whole filming process, I made a huge I made sure that I wouldn't like share anything personal because I don't like stuff like that. You can barely see me anyway. Yes. And then when Jared finally approached the idea of like doing something personal, I was like, shoot, fine, okay then. And
We may get a bit of this, but bits and pieces we'll get it.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah, it was strange at first because I don't like sharing like feelings and all like that to keep it brief, but it was fine. But I didn't get to watch the scene in the movie, so yeah, I don't know how it turned out.
Well, it turned out pretty well. To take our word for it. I think that Jared, this seems to kind of convey something to me about how how what you conveyed wasn't just expressed in the way they were talking to you, but the power of the film is really in just what's going on and the interactions that we're seeing, right? I mean, that seems to be what it's about, because as Elle just said, she's uncomfortable talking about this stuff explicitly, and so you have to just sort of see the way this stuff is playing out in these scenes, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's funny. I love whenever Elle can join us because it brings me back to her grandmother's house with her brother and sister running around and making things really interesting.
Yeah. Let me ask, there's one more quick question. We'll wrap things up here in a moment. So another question that I did want to get to that comes from Mary, who education comes up a bit in the film, of course, and the question of education and what educational institutions are doing for, Native people. And Mary wants to know how many young people feel the educational institutions that they're hoping to enter, or maybe even are involved with now, are culturally prepared to help them, in getting an education. Any idea? Roni Jo, maybe that's a question for you at first, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, because it's very difficult. I mean, Native young people, they can't know what they're necessarily missing in terms of what their education could be if it was affirming their culture, affirming their identity as Native peoples. Um, and, you know, right now we're in the middle of discussions throughout our country about critical race theory and whether or not we're willing to have conversations in our country about, in schools, about the way that our country, our governments, our institutions have dealt with people of different races, genders, sexualities, socioeconomic status, immigrant status, or whatever, and to what degree we want to talk about that with, you know, within institutions and within systems. And yet we can see that, you know, in this movie where kids are being taught about histories that don't quite include them, and don't include them in a way that really is, you know, maybe, you know, that maybe helps them take charge of their own futures, or be able to make decisions about the places where they live, or about their families, or, you know, about their locations. And that becomes really problematic. You know, we know that the state of Utah has had difficulties in terms of even having fair voting processes for folks in southern Utah, especially Navajo people. And so our schools should be places where young people learn and understand that in terms of their ability to participate with their own democracy and in their local municipalities, but they can't if they don't know. And so these are all crucial points that need to be taken up by people who write curriculum, by people who enact curriculum. But we have to be brave enough to have those conversations. And Indigenous people know that. This is not something that we have to tell Indigenous elders. They know this. This is something that we need to get through to folks right now who are running the school systems, and have them understand.
Let me ask finally, Jared, you can't say too much about the status of the film now in terms of distributors and whatever. I know you have to keep some of that to yourself, so I won't put you on the spot about that. But what can you say about the future of the film, where it's headed? Those who are going to want to be able to see it again in the future, what can you say for now, anyway?
For now, we can say that keep your eyes peeled. There is something in the works where we'll have means to share it with the national audience. So in the meantime, I mean, I guess we have a website, theglitteringworld.com, and we'll keep folks updated there. But very soon.
In the meantime, be patient is what you're saying.
Yes, there's a little bit of a gap.
That's all right. That's we can handle it. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone. Granite, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're really grateful you could be with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks so much. And Elle, I know it took a while to get you there, and you came and went, but we're glad you made it.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Dr. Roni Jo Draper, thank you very much again, as always.
Thank you.
Jared Jakins, congratulations. Thank you again. Congratulations on this film. And thank you for all of you who joined us tonight. And again, as Jared said, stay tuned for information about what's coming for this film. Thanks all very much. Good night.
Hey, have a nice night. I can log out.